here we are talking about the band's upcoming Bloodstock debut and all things Blast Tyrant.
Well, it's unique for us because as far as I can recall, we have not been there before. I know that it's been something that's been brought up several times over the years, and the scheduling has never quite worked out. We came out of the pandemic, and it seems like we spent 2 years just catching up on old stuff, making up a lot of dates that were canceled, and somewhere in there we found time to record a record and put that out. And so we've been pretty busy. This year, I think will be, when compared to last year, slightly less touring, slightly less shows, but we're no less busy. I'm here at the jam room right now, and we just wrapped up a rehearsal and we made some new riffs. So, we're always working.
Amazing. I just spoke to Flogging Molly, who it's their first time at Bloodstock as well.
Is that right?
I guess like it's got to be a rare thing, as it was for Dave from Flogging Molly, that there are firsts for Clutch at this point in time.
Yeah, it's that's the best part about being in this band, though, because we've been at it now for 33 years now. And there are always firsts that happen, and I still enjoy that. We're going to Latin America for the first time this summer. That's going to be amazing. And then just being able to go out and play shows and just keep doing what we do. It's really a privilege and an honor, and then to be able to play a festival like Bloodstock. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of great bands on the bill. It's good stuff, man. We enjoy all of it.
And what's the difference between like at your own show Clutch and festival Clutch?
Well, I feel like when we first started getting a lot of festival offers, we would think about the set list a little more, and I suppose to some degree we still do. But more and more, a Clutch show is just a Clutch show. We always write the set list the day of the show, and we take turns as band members writing the set list. So very often I don't even know what we're going to play until maybe an hour or two before we hit the stage.
And is there a reason that you stay true to that while doing festivals? Because like I know a lot of people have like these principles where it's different playing to your own people versus playing to just a variety of people. What's the where does it come from, like sticking to that principle?
Well, I think the most important thing that's for the live show anyway is making that show be unique to itself. And so the first thing we can do in order to sort of facilitate that is to knock down any of those things that might be sort of go-to, like now's the part where we say, hey, everybody, put your hands in the air. And then here's the part where everybody says, okay, get fucking crazy. And for me, that stuff is not rock and roll. That's more like some sort of a theatrical performance. I think it's fine if that's what you like to do. We don't like to do that. We like to play real music in real time, have it be a real experience. And so for that reason, putting the songs together before we hit the stage is I think that's key. It makes for each show to have a unique energy. And it also gives the ability for us as band members to sort of pick the songs that we want to play or we don't want to play for whatever reason. Speaking for myself, when I put together a set list, it's not always just, oh, well, this is my favorite song, or I like this drum thing. It might be something totally different. It might be, we played this song last night and I wasn't really too excited about the way I hit that chorus, and I know I can do better than that this time. So I'm going to put that song in the set list tonight. I'm going to try to give that one another shot. Or maybe it's, hey, we haven't done this tune in a long time. That'll be something fun to do for us. And that energy, I think, that energy goes to the audience as well, and they realize, hey, this is not the same thing that happened last night. So in that way, I think playing a live show it's a special experience, and we try to make it unique for the folks who they pay their hard-earned money and they want to see a real rock show. They're not interested in somebody playing something exactly like the record. And so that's what we try to focus on.
And like when you've got a core sound, but each of your records has like a unique flavor, when you're putting together that set list, like, is there any thought given to to cohesion, or like does your mood sway in one direction and it kind of like permeates the entire set list, or is there a conscious choice to pull from each of the eras of Clutch?
I think there's certainly a little bit of that. I think it's important to us to sort of highlight different years of the band. It wasn't always like that. You know, we've been around for 33 years now. I do remember a time when we were around for about 20 years. And speaking for myself, I very much wanted to focus on what we were doing right now because I thought that was the most important thing. You know, perspective is everything. And now being able to look back on a record that we did 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it might be, I think I'm better at being able to appreciate the records for what they were. It's really a document of where the band was musically, mentally, all those kinds of things. And so each one of the records that we put out is equally as important, and we try to give the fans a well-rounded show, something that represents all eras of the band.
And sorry to just ask you about, like, when you said about 20 years ago, you really wanted to concentrate on that thing. Was that when you did Beale Street and Strange Cousins from the West, when you kind of took that detour and went super blues orientated? You wanted to really concentrate on that. Is that the era that you're talking about?
Sure, yeah, that would be a good example of that, where we played less of the stuff off of Transnational or maybe even the self-titled record and really just focused more on those things that we did in the 2000s era. But as I said, you know, the more time goes by, you look back at those records, and at one point I thought the record sounded totally different. And now I listen to them, I'm like, yeah, it's the same four dudes. You know, it's like, okay, I knew where that riff came from. You know, that riff is an ancestor of a riff that came 20 years before it. You know, and so in that way, you know, as different as all the stuff is, it's still the same four guys playing music.
And this is it. I want to take you back to the very beginning when it comes to, like, over time, people celebrate the fact that you are your own thing and that, like, you have your unique sound. But when you're in that first place and you're finding your people, like, was it a case of just you were always at ease with being your own thing from the very beginning? Because, like, whether it be I look at you opening for Pantera or Sepultura on Chaos AD and all these things that happened in those earliest days. Like, was it easy to find your own people, and did it kind of help you always be at ease with being your own thing?
Yeah, I think we've always sort of been comfortable in our own skin. In the very earliest days of the band, I'm talking about when we just played our first 4 or 5 shows. Those were shows that were hardcore shows. Specifically East Coast hardcore bands. And so I remember doing shows with bands like Shelter. I remember doing some shows with a very young Life of Agony back then. A lot of Baltimore bands too, Next Step Up, Step Aside. These were all East Coast hardcore bands that I don't think we sounded like those bands. But that was a great scene for us because it was easy to get shows. We would trade shows with other bands. It was a very active, very fertile scene. And so with not too much effort, you could go up to Pennsylvania, for example, and we might go play for 65 people up there, or go down to Richmond and do a Sunday matinee hardcore show, and there might be 150 guys there. So early on, we just played those hardcore shows, and right away, I think people realized that we were unique amongst that scene anyway. And that same kind of scenario played itself out in different ways as the years went by. One of the first major tours that we got was Bad Religion. And we didn't sound anything like Bad Religion, but that was a great run for us. And that happened time and time again. We did Prong and Sepultura. We got the Marilyn Manson tour, and that was a crazy one for us. We thought, there's no way we can go on tour with this band. No one's going to appreciate this stuff. And I remember at the time, the audience reception was not the greatest reception we ever got. But we just got up there, we just did our thing. We played, and wouldn't you know it, we came back through 6 or 8 months later, and then there's kids with Marilyn Manson t-shirts, and they got their little lunch box, the whole thing. And so that process just went, it just happened over and over again with Pantera and with Coheed and Cambria and any number of bands. And I think the result was that we have a fan base that's very, very diverse. And they've grown to expect us to do something a little different with each record. And they also know that we're not going to sound like the other bands on the radio. We're not going to act like the other bands on the radio. And we're certainly not going to say those things in between the songs that all those bands say. I think people have come to appreciate that about us.
Forgive the vagueness of this question, but who is a Clutch fan? Because it, like you say, it draws from so many, and over the course of 33 years now, like you'll have picked up so many different kinds of people. Like, who is a Clutch fan?
Right. Yeah, I agree. It grows a little bit with each year. You know, early on it was the hardcore scene, and then we started getting some metal guys coming to the show, and then we did that Manson tour, and then there were goth girls showing up at the show, and so this thing just happens, and it just keeps growing and growing. Nowadays, we have sometimes the whole front row will be kids in elementary school. You know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 14 years old. Right behind them will be their parents, and right behind them will be their parents. So it's not uncommon for us to see 3 generations of kids just rocking and rolling. All varieties of people, from all walks of life, and we're proud of that.
Yeah, it's something that whenever I've spoken to someone from your band, it feels like it's worn as a real kind of, it's a real source of pride for you, is that this is something that's been amassed over years. It's never been like you were wearing the right fashion and that's what was in vogue at the time. And so, oh, here's Clutch. And it was never a case of like, your song was used on a shampoo advert, so that you had this like breakout moment. Like, what do you think there is to be said in terms of building something over time? And was there a point, as we're going to move towards Blast Tyrant, was there a point in time where you felt that change?
Yes, I think the first 10 years were incredibly slow as far as the growth of the band went. It sort of seemed like we put Transnational Speedway League out, and the fan base sort of grew rather quickly. And then maybe for about 10 years, it was just like, you know, we would play Omaha, Nebraska, and there would be 700 people there. And we would come back, you know, a year later, and there would be 715 people there. You know,
Yeah.
it was really, really slow. Somewhere around the early 2000s, probably around the time that Blast Tyrant came out, we started to notice that trajectory started to pick up a little bit. It was still super slow. It was not an overnight thing, but then we started to see, okay, wow, you know, last time we played here, there were 700 people. This time there's 1,200 people. Oh, wow. Okay. You know, it started to grow like that. So it was just a little bit faster. Um, it's happened very naturally, and it's not because of one thing. It's not because of a radio hit. It's not, as you said, because of a commercial. It's much more, you know, hey, my buddy heard this on Spotify the other night, and it's really great. It reminds me of, you know, Black Sabbath. Check it out. Or, you know, my dad was listening to you guys, you know, when I was young, and now I love it too. So it's, the people learn about the music in all different ways, and again, I think it's just kind of a testimony to the sort of organic nature that this thing has grown.
Did Beavis and Butthead help Clutch find their people?
Certainly, yes, that was a big deal. We were fans of that show even before we got added to it, and you know, that I think those shows are still funny. We were surprised when they picked it up. We had no idea that was going to happen, and it was good for us. As I said, you know, it's those things. It's one thing here, one thing there, and then it's just been a very slow build for us.
And when you mentioned Blast Tyrant being a moment for the band where that started to change, what did you feel that you learned about Clutch up to that point in time? Because even if we take the records pre Blast Tyrant, that like from Transnational to the Elephant Riders and Pure Rock Fury is an awful lot of growth. Like going into that record, did you feel like you'd found a nucleus amongst all of that vast material on those first records?
I think so. I think by the time, um, well, if we think about it chronologically, um, and we pick it up, say where we were with Elephant Riders, which came out in 1998. By that point, that was our third release on a major label. Um, the prior three were totally different. Each one kind of occupied a unique space. Um, the challenge for us was getting the record label to want to make another album, and that was always a pain in the ass, because usually what would happen, and it did happen up until that point, the record label would sign the band, they would put the record out, and then within a very short amount of time, the record label would realize, hey, this is a tough sell. You know, these guys aren't really getting radio spins because we didn't really have radio songs. The growth of the band really relied on the label actually doing some work. And people who worked at labels back then didn't really want to do work. Everybody wanted to be associated with the winners, and no one wanted to be associated with the stinkers. So, you know, when our record came out and it only sold 3,500 copies in the first week or whatever, and back in 1996, you know, that was a signal for the folks at the label to sort of be hands off the band. You know, no one wants to work a record like that. So it was a tough spot to be a band in. What happened after Elephant Riders, though, was that we made a record called Jam Room, and it's a little bit of a sort of a deep cuts kind of a record for a lot of folks. Maybe some people don't even know about that record, but that was a record that we recorded with this sole intention of putting it out 100% on our own. We did not even want it to come out on a record label. And so for that reason, that record was very experimental. We covered a lot of ground, and that's a weird record. I think the result was, after we made that very sort of out of the box kind of record, we kind of got back to what we originally were doing, maybe around the self-titled record, which was putting some riffs together in a way that made for a very efficient rock and roll song. And that began the journey of Blast Tyrant.
Gotcha. And what can I ask? Because I have a natural affinity for that mid-90s period where alternative felt like it was a very broad canvas. And as someone that likes interesting music, at a time when bands like Primus and Ministry could go platinum, like when you look at how sanitized today's world even is on our doorstep, when we look at rock and roll and metal or whatever, like how sanitized that is, it felt like a real time when the freaks ran the asylum. Did you feel like there was actual expectations upon Clutch? Like, because so many odd bands were taking the airwaves by storm. Like the thought of the Downward Spiral being a mainstream record in 2024 is mental to look at. Did you feel like Clutch had major label expectations upon you?
Well, we had the folks that worked at the major labels had expectations for sure. We as a band had zero expectations.
It's not why you're and like forgive me, but like you don't strike me as a band that are playing music to have topless girls in limousines.
No, and you're absolutely right. And you know, a lot of times people will ask me, you know, what is some advice that you would give young musicians? And one of the things I say is surround yourself with people who are like-minded. So if the idea is to put a band together in which you'll get a bunch of girls to come to the shows and dance around, that's totally fine. You can do that, but be sure that everybody's on the same page. We weren't one of those bands. We were not a band who was interested in girls. We were not interested in getting on the radio for sure. No interest in that whatsoever. Even playing big venues, no, we don't want any of that crap. The bands who play those big venues, they suck. You know.
Yeah, we're from Maryland, from the swamp, and here's what we do.
Yeah, I mean that was really the mentality. And so when we heard that a major label wanted to sign us, we were like, "Are you kidding me? All right, whatever."
Yeah.
We made those records with the intention of making records for ourselves. making records for our friends, our buddies who were in bands, that they might say, hey, that's a great riff, man. I dig that tune. But that was really the beginning and the end of it. It was not it certainly wasn't to make a career, and it certainly wasn't to become popular. The folks who worked at the record labels, of course, had a very different thought process, and that's where the rub lied.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
And so I do the official podcast for a band that have quite a diverse catalogue. But when it comes to the, like, quote unquote their sound, it feels like people always have a particular record, the same record in mind. Do you feel like Blast Tyrant is the clutch sound to an awful lot of people out there?
I do. I do it. There was some good energy that came into that record, and there's a reason I think why that record came out the way it did. I think in a lot of ways the producer that we work with at the time, Machine, was instrumental and getting us to focus, and in a lot of ways look at the music from a fan's perspective. Machine listened back to our previous records, and he was like, this is a great moment, and this is another great moment, and this is really cool too. How do you guys have these moments, and how do we put this all together so that it's an entire record of cool clutch stuff, and so he helped us sort through, I think, a lot of the material. He also helped us with arrangements, getting these tunes to come together in a way that was efficient. This idea of, all right, this is a chorus. Let's make it sound like a chorus, not just another riff in the tune. Let's make it stand out because it is a chorus. Or this is the verse. How do we make it sound even more like a verse so that Neil can do all that awesome stuff that Neil does? How do we best support Neil? So I think Machine was super important in that regard. We had from time to time work with producers before, but none of them were as hands-on as Machine was, and we learned a tremendous amount from him on that recording.
Can I ask, like, because musically, like, Clutch are a real ensemble band. Like, you change any of your styles in any way, and it would spin the whole thing off of its axis in such a dramatic way. Can I ask you what you learned about three guys supporting what Neil does on Blast Tyrant?
Yes. Speaking as specifically as a drummer, I feel like that's job number one. Make the lead instrument or the lead voice, whatever that is at the time, make that sound good. Make all the musicians around you feel very comfortable, and make it so that whatever choices those guys make them feel like those are the right choices. Support them in that way. So I think Machine helped us listen to the vocal, and I think maybe to some degree he helped put more importance on the vocal, because prior to that, we'd get a bunch of riffs together, we'd jump in the studio, record those riffs, and then here would come Neil, and then Neil would put the vocals on top, and that's the way it happened almost exclusively up until around Blast Tyrant. Right around then, we started to really work with the vocal. Before we record it, let's hear what is Neil even going to sing, first of all, because before that we didn't even have that much information. So Machine helped us understand the importance of the vocal. He helped us understand that although there are many musicians who come to our shows, drummers, bass players, guitarists, there are those out in the audience, but everybody is a singer. Everybody at least sings in the car, in the shower, maybe even at band practice, but everybody wants to sing. And so that vocal is that's the most important thing. Support that vocal, make that vocal feel good. When the vocal is supported in the right way, then the music, that just happens naturally.
It felt like Neil was exuding more personality on Blast Tyrant as well. When you had Pass the Mic and things like that started to really lean into that prior, but
Yeah.
it felt like on Blast Tyrant, I always say, like, if there's a a Live Aid style situation, right? Of all of the rock and metal singers, the best ones are the ones that the second they come on it, you're like, it's that person. And I
Yeah.
feel like so much of the, oh, fuck me, that's Neil Fallon, that we all know and love, like really came to the boil on Blast Tyrant as well.
Yeah, I think Machine helped Neil sort of come into his own in a lot of ways. You know, he no doubt that he is by far one of the most talented lyricists in rock and roll. I think Machine helped him also become one of the most talented vocalists in rock and roll.
And I guess one of the other ways that I wanted to ask about that is I find that like be it the sound or the vibe or I guess what the kids now call the lore of like Clutch, I feel like so much of it the lyric isn't necessarily autobiographical like it is in so many bands. It's off the wall and fantastical in its own very unique way. It's almost like I remember Keith from Every Time I Die and Now Many Eyes once upon a time saying, I just like cool couplets and then finding things around it. Like, is that a lot of what goes on this record? Because there are more cool lines on Blast Tyrant than most bands that have even been doing things for the 30 plus years that you have can manage in a lifetime.
Yeah, I agree. I think in a lot of ways that record is it's a great document of Neil's abilities, and and I think it also it was it was it was a record that allowed him to sort of become more himself, and all the records that came after that were informed by Blast Tyrant.
Mm. Did you ever feel extreme guilt for the suspicion that was then aroused upon white men driving black vans?
Indeed, and still to this day, uh, Neil will come in with some lyrics, and I still get goosebumps, man. Still to this day, it's a special thing, and whatever he sings about, it's not what you think he's going to sing about. I'll get an idea in my head about, okay, when we play this riff, Neil's going to do something like this. It's going to be in this style, and it's going to be great. And sure enough, when he comes in and he's got, okay, I've got these words, he starts singing, and it's not that at all. It's something totally different. It's just as exciting for us as it is for the fans.
And is it a case of like I know that like he was always keen to point out that this is not a concept record at all. Are there familiar themes or is each song its own universe?
Each song is definitely its own universe, and if
Yeah.
there are themes that happen on an album, it's only something that we see after the record is done. Um, I, I think Neil really just writes for the tune. He listens to the songs and he just kind of comes up with some cool words that will sound good with those riffs. It's not a message. There's not some master story. There's not like a storyline that's supposed to happen out throughout the record. It's really just that. It's art in real time. He's listening to the music and he's just coming up with words that'll fit in there and be cool. One of the cool parts of the writing process as well is that Neil will come up with these lines, these ideas, and he'll audition them in different songs. So sometimes you'll hear lyrics in one song, and then maybe a couple months will go by and we'll come up with a new idea, and you might hear those words again a little bit different this time. So he's got these ideas sort of in his head or in his notebook, and he finds the right avenue, the right stage to put these things on. Um, it's 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 something I don't get tired of. I still love it.
I love the fact that you were saying about getting goosebumps when these things start to materialize and when you're writing songs and like you're quite an unassuming bunch, Clutch. And I've read you saying that like you didn't when you were recording Blast Tyrant, you didn't know that it was going to be this record that people are constantly referencing all this far down the line. And while I've been lucky enough to ask a lot of bands like the question about this, about like what might be considered a seminal record, I believe you that you didn't know, but it becomes harder to believe when you hear the intro to The Mob Goes Wild. That when you put that together, that you're that like I find it harder to believe that it becomes like not just another moment, but just the latest Clutch song to put in the back catalogue. Were there moments on that record where you knew you were hitting a good run of form?
I think we knew that we were treading new ground in the way that we arranged the songs, and the way that we wrote that we approached the recording process as well. The recording process for us at that time was quite different than recordings we'd done before. It was a very modern way of recording. It was click tracks. Much of the drums I recorded on my own. And then the guys would come back and put their stuff on top of it. So that kind of mentality was very different for us. Again, we learned a tremendous amount, and we still use some of those techniques to this day. You know, I don't think there's one correct way to make a record. It's not as if, you know, we're saying, oh, no click tracks, no tuners, you know, everything on tape, blah, blah, blah. You know, that's a cool way to make a record. And it's also cool to do it the total other way, you know, to be very sort of analytical and clinical about it. At the end of the day, it's all about what is the music that you recorded? What's the document that you made? So I don't think there's one right way to do it. But on Blast Tyrant, we experimented with some new ways of recording, and in that way we learned a tremendous amount.
Yeah, it's funny to consider you playing to a click because there's such a natural groove to Clutch, and because it feels primal. Like it almost it feels bizarre to imagine things being played to a click. And like one of the other things is like a lot of Hammond organ really starts to creep its way in more. Like it's become
Sure.
such a signature part of your sound. It feels like that was not necessarily a first, but it felt like it became a predominant element of Clutch from this moment forward.
Without a doubt, that's an important sound. Um, After that record, we toured with an organist for quite some time, Mick Shower. He was great. He made some beautiful additions to the band. He was an excellent musician. Um, we at the moment we don't have a keyboardist, but we have at times, and it's always fun to play with. It's always fun to play with keys. These days, whenever we have a keyboardist, it's usually Per Viberg. You probably maybe you've seen him before. He's
Yes.
played with us quite some times. He's
Yeah.
great.
And I wanted to ask about if we're going into instrumental elements on Clutch. Can I ask you about the role of the cowbell? Because it plays such a massive part in Cypress Grove. I know you'd used it on Wishbone on the record before, and like I guess it's a primary part of DC Sound Attack. But I wanted to ask about the role of the cowbell, and especially when it comes to Cypress Grove.
Yeah, that is a very good observation. And yes, the cowbell is extremely important, especially in our band. I think probably for us, when we play cowbells and when we think about cowbells, the reference is DC Go-Go. And not everybody knows what DC Go-Go is. DC Go-Go is a very specific kind of funk that happens exclusively in Washington, DC. It's very percussively based. There's congos and timbales. But one of the most identifying factors is these cowbell rhythms. And they are beautiful and intricate. And for me, at this point of having heard it for so much in my life, it's sort of it's soothing, because I just know those rhythms and I know those sounds. So when we play cowbells, we are referencing particularly DC Go-Go. And for that reason, it's a very important part of the Clutch sound.
Who are DC Go-Go artists that people should check out?
Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers. Chuck Brown is the godfather of DC Go-Go. There's Junkyard Band. There's Rare Essence. Trouble Funk.
That is an
And
excellent name for a band.
Trouble Funk. Oh man, they were
Letting you know
good.
exactly what you're in for.
Yes, yeah. So all that stuff is super important. The rhythms in there are just, man, they're infectious, and they stay with you. It's something that I grew up with, and so when I'm up there playing, I'm listening to go-go in my head, you know. Maybe everybody can't hear it out there, but I'm hearing cowbells and I'm hearing congas, and that informs the sound. Um, and that's where that comes from.
And the Regulator felt like a brave step forward at that point in your journey. Like you say, this is a band that you're a band that talk about playing with Life of Agony and those kind of bands, and to get to the stage where you are comfortable enough to put an entirely acoustic, vibey song in that regard on a record. Did that song feel like like a departure at that point in time?
It was probably a departure for the folks who had heard it for the first time. If anybody spent any time with the band hanging around, they would know that that was something that we were listening to even since the very earliest days of the band. I can remember specifically being on our very first U.S. tour and listening to artists like Lightning Hopkins and John Lee Hooker and Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and all these guys. So that sound was a part of our listening anyway. And I think slowly through the years it sort of creeped in different ways. I think probably the Regulator is a good document of where it really sort of it came into its own, and it became a part of the Clutch sound.
Yeah, and it speaks a lot to the bravery of how far you'd come as a band to be able to go from listening to that stuff and appreciating it to making it part of your sound.
For sure.
And I guess also on the line of the Beavis and Butthead thing, The Walking Dead made a big surge for the Regulator.
It did. Again, that was another, you know, some people learned about us through Beavis and Butthead. Some people learned about us through a video game. Some people learned about us from a TV show, incredibly. And that was something that was also unexpected. We didn't really know anybody at the show. And at the end of the day, it was just somebody over there who was putting the music together, and they had seen us in some capacity as a younger person. And they decided, well, this would be a great song to put in the show. And it paid off in a big way.
Did you check out the scene? Have you seen that whole
I did,
sequence?
and you know, my wife was a fan of that show before I had seen that. I'd heard that they had used our music, and I watched that episode, and I was hooked there for a few seasons. They
Amazing.
lost it shortly after that, for a few seasons I watched it, and I did enjoy it.
And so while we're on the subject of talking about the undead, Army of Bono. I only know of one Bono. Are we talking about the same Bono?
Probably. You have to ask Neil that for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's the same guy.
Was there subject was there conversation around the Irish songster?
You know, it's another example of having an idea in your head of what you think the lyrics might be like, or what they might be about, or how Neil might sing them. And when I heard those lyrics for the first time, I was like, all right, man, I'm giving up. I don't know where you're coming up with this stuff. I mean,
And so I will take to asking Neil about that the next time we do this.
I do know that we liked U2, and I remember Neil in high school wearing a U2, I think it was Unforgettable Fire t-shirt.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice.
yeah,
And so Neil has spoken about, so while we're talking about Neil,
yeah,
he was speaking about the fact that during the Pure Rock Fury touring cycle,
yeah.
it became a point in time where he was having to think about life and the longevity of the band, and it became an odd period for him. But Blast Tyrant and the making of it, the recording of it, and where the record went from there kind of completely 180'd that for him. Can I ask what your mindset was going into making this record, and did it feel like a pivotal time for the band, especially with what you were saying earlier with a couple of records on a major label and those kind of things?
It no, it did not feel like we were approaching a pivotal time in the band's career. In fact, it might have even been a little bit of the opposite, where we made 3 records for major labels. We made another record just completely on our own, and we sold it over the internet. Returned to a major label for a minute, and that was short-lived. So then we were sort of sitting there. We didn't have any labels. But we had this batch of songs. You know, we had the Regulator and Army of Bono and Warm Drink and Cypress Grove and all those. We knew we had I'm getting an email now. I've got another interview I need to get to here.
You got it.
Yeah, but anyway, to make a long story short, I think the band's sort of perspective at the time was, this is just another chance to make another record. Let's do it and see where it takes us. We did not expect that it would be the sort of the turning point that it became.
Last question then. So when we look back at Blast Tyrant and you've got this canon of work that goes all the way up to the current day, and you're already working on new riffs, as you mentioned earlier on, what is this record's unique, like, I don't want to say selling point, but like, what is this record's unique characteristic in your canon of work?
It's all hits.
It feels like the one where you stopped hating the idea of arenas.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. I think it's a very focused. I think it's a focused record, and I think the variety of sounds and feels that we got into on that record set the tone for what happened after.
Amen. And what happens after is Bloodstock for the first time this summer. Thanks for your time, man. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you, Terry. You have a great one.